I'm about to utter a sentence that would usually be considered one of the biggest red flags of all, so please forgive me in advance. I found this interesting post on Reddit. A user by the name of Izon Mezier compiled a list of every combat job in FF14 and ranked them by casts per minute. And honestly, the implications and conclusions you can draw from these changes are endlessly intriguing. What you're seeing here is essentially a rating of how fast each job is in the game right now. So what we're going to be doing today is taking a look a little deeper into this, comparing it with the average speed of jobs at the launch of Endwalker and at various landmark moments during its lifespan, seeing how the new jobs slot in, and having a bit of a conversation about what makes for an interesting job in this game overall, and how the number of buttons you need to press per minute ties into that. I know that the Dawntrail job changes have been a point of contention, and will likely continue to be so for the foreseeable future, and we are going to have a deeper conversation about that in the future through an entirely separate video that I'm cooking, but for now I think this post is worth an individual chat for a couple of reasons. Firstly, let's look at how the ratings came into being. These are taken from the top 5 season rankings for damage on Everkeep Extreme, the second Dawntrail Extreme trial, and show the average cast per minute across the top 5, the highest and the lowest respectively, as well as making an additional notation on which player within those top 5 rankings attained those highest and lowest CPMs. The first thing I want to do is look at the 19 pre-existing jobs and compare them to their old placements, and talk about why any changes to their rankings might have occurred. So across all 19 old jobs, the lowest CPM is on Black Mage, with the lowest top 5 entry being 28.9, and at the high end we have Ninja, with the highest in total being 49.4. Now, let's take a quick little look at the comparison of now to 6.0 CPM values, which were taken with the same goals and metrics but using Hydaelyn Extreme as the fight in question. So firstly, the vast majority of jobs have gone up in their total CPM, which is somewhat expected. If we look at Ninja all the way at the top, the average went from 45.6 all the way up to 49, over 3 extra button presses per minute on average. A job like Dragoon, which has stayed in the exact same position on the overall leaderboard from Endwalker to Dawntrail, has gone up as well, with 40.9 increasing to 43.6. Red Mage and Bard 2 going up from 36.5 to a flat 40, and with Bard increasing from 42.5 all the way to 46. This seems relatively consistent amongst many of the jobs that didn't receive heavy changes to their overall rotation. The additional OGCDs or tools they obtained in Dawntrail acted to push up their average CPM by roughly 3, despite any trimming that may have taken place alongside. There are some that didn't go up by quite so much but did increase, such as Machinist with an overall adjustment from 45 to 46.2, but this is still a slight increase regardless. We are pressing more buttons on the whole every minute in Dawntrail to execute our rotations perfectly than we were in Endwalker. One side note I want to make here are that the healer maximums and minimums differ from one another fairly drastically for the most part, a lot more so than the tank and healer differentials do. This is likely because of a difference in the number of healing OGCDs applied on the whole during an encounter, either due to an increase in efficient group defensives, tank cooldowns, and volds to triage, or to be honest, it's equally as likely that this was a pass run where the co-healer was handling all the issues, which would be a lot lamer, but definitely still a possibility. But despite most jobs increasing marginally in their CPM, there are a few outliers, and those are the ones I want to discuss in a little more detail. Firstly, we have Black Mage, definitely the most significant number difference out of the entire bunch, reducing down from 32.8 down to 29.3. It was always a low CPM job, but now it has the lowest number of button presses per minute in the entire game, dropping by the same volume that the majority of others increased by. This is likely in part due to the removal of Sharp Cast, as well as to a lesser extent the collapse of non-standard rotations thanks to the recent rework to many of the job's core systems. This means that we're likely seeing a little less transpose usage currently than before. You still do use transpose on Black Mage, which is likely why the number isn't even lower, but the duration of each Astral Fire and Umbral Ice cycle on average has lengthened, thanks to the pseudo requirement to hit your 6 Fire 4s, then use the Flare Star that you unlock, and then you also actually have to do that Blizzard 4 in Ice now, whereas you didn't before a lot of the time. Dark Knight also reduced, dipping down from 37.9 to 36.4, which is an overall reduction of 1.5 buttons per minute. This surprised me, because Dark Knight dropped a lot more in my head, and it was at this moment that I realized Hydaelyn Extreme has downtime, and Zoraljar almost has none aside from those momentary knockups. So I had a bit of a quick look at the 6.4 chart too in order to compare even more efficiently, and yeah, just as I expected, Dark Knight is a bit higher here with an average of 40.5. In fact, in the 6.4 chart, most jobs go up by 2 or so, which puts the Dawntrail figures in actuality only around 1-ish higher for the majority of jobs, which is quite interesting. But this means the Dark Knight is dropping from the 40 per minute ballpark all the way to 36, which is much more in line with my expectations. I've heard from a number of reformed previous Dark Knight mains, and my own experience definitely lines up with this, that one of the things they loved about the job was its intense, weaving-heavy burst windows, and that aspect has been neutered by a significant margin, putting it in line with Paladin and Warrior rather than competing with Gunbreaker like it was previously. I'm curious if this has contributed to a lower pick rate this expansion, or if enough new people have picked it up and enjoyed it to offset the losses. The third job I wanted to highlight is Astro. At the start of Endwalker, you were looking at a CPM of 38.6, but let's double check 6.4 as well, which was almost an increase of 3 at 41.3. And now if we move on forward to Dawntrail, the number sits at 38.1. Astro received a fairly extensive card rework, and this number reduction is primarily coming from the reduced number of draws that you need to do, and is likely also factoring in things like Astrodyne and the reduction of healing that you need to do in Everkeep, especially with your single target tools. The number of buttons that you're going to be pressing on Astro and Savage is likely to be close to on par or maybe one less than Endwalker, which is quite interesting. Some of the Dawntrail alterations were touted as decreasing the intensity of burst windows, and whilst they've done that to an extent, they have not exponentially increased your number of key inputs on the whole. The thing I want to do next is take a look at the new additions, Viper and Pictomancer, and see where they rank on the list. Viper has a whopping 50.6 and Picto is sitting pretty at 29.8. That's right, the two new jobs are the highest and second lowest CPM entries to the entire selection of FF14 jobs. The only one going any lower, and by a very marginal amount, is Black Mage. Both of these recent additions have seen incredible popularity and rave reviews about their gameplay, and both for entirely different reasons. Viper is a relatively simple job to grasp, with regular double weaving and Enshroud-esque states of speedy GCDs with OGCD attacks in between. The most positionals per minute of any 7.0 melee iteration, and it also comes with the added nuance of most of these OGCDs being use it or lose it, introducing a further failure state that was rarely present before. Conversely, Picto doesn't have many casts per minute at all, favouring placing its challenge squarely in another realm entirely, planning. Pictomancer is a cast bar heavy job, especially when you compare it to some of its role brothers like Summoner, and the core engagement of the job comes from carefully planning your free movement tools such as the hammer, figuring out safe places to plant and prepare your motifs, and improperly stockpiling for your insane burst windows. So, despite it literally having 20 less button inputs per minute, it's equally as engaging as Viper, but in very different ways. The point I'm hoping to drive home is that there are two things, more than anything, from totally different schools of thought, in my opinion, that make gameplay interesting within a job in FF14. The first engagement factor is having a lot to press. Viper and Ninja exemplify this, but you can find this exact same lifeblood flowing through the veins of many of the high-ranking entries like Machinist and Dragoon. Often it is fairly clear what they need to be pressing next, but during their burst windows especially, the skill expression comes from masterfully managing to overcome the double weaves and GCDs cleanly, in a roughly correct order, and doing so whilst juggling any mechanical constraints of the fight. It's like playing a song on the piano, your fingers dancing across the keys, hoping that dealing with the crescendo of the song doesn't make you lose control and hit a wrong note. The decision making is still there, but it's secondary in those moments to the fast and furious cadence of the rotation itself, and that alone is fun, engaging, and skillful to execute. The second is by introducing meaningful decision making at various points, which allows players to individually plan around each fight to give them the highest chances at success. This is the realm where Pictomancer excels, much like Black Mage did in Endwalker and still does to an extent in Dawntrail, having fluidity within your toolkit and building up the knowledge of when to expend your movement and burst damage resources, especially on caster jobs, not summoner, alongside managing multiple meters and timers, is incredibly rewarding. This is also part of what keeps healer gameplay in Savage and Ultimates palatable despite their simple DPS kits, and it's fair to say this is the absolute opposite end of the spectrum to what makes Viper interesting. Often, the best jobs either merge these two elements flawlessly, or are best in class at either one or the other. At least that's what I think. But I want to wrap us back round to the curious case of Dark Knight for a moment. Dark Knight was a job that was exemplified by their fast-paced, weave-intensive burst windows, and now it's the lowest CPM tank. What did it receive in exchange for this? A single GCD usable as a combo action off of Living Shadow, which yes, looks very cool, and does have situational use cases that are interesting in having a 10-yard range, providing Dark Knight an avenue to dip out of melee range occasionally. They also got what are in essence animation upgrades to their burst attack, and an upgrade to their defensive which all tanks were recipient to across the board. Dark Knight, if anything, lost more than it gained in the transition from 6.x to 7.0. When you cleave out real estate within a job, and you don't fill it with equal amounts of meaningful gameplay, be it decision making or high CPM, is that a good thing? Or is the job just flat out becoming less interesting as an overall package? That's a genuine question, because what I really want out of this video is a discussion for me to ruminate on as I make my much larger video on Dawntrail's job design. What do you think makes a job in Final Fantasy XIV fun to play, engaging and rewarding? Do you think jobs are more interesting now than in Endwalker? And of course, are you enjoying Viper and Pictomancer? Please do let me know in the comments section. The thread is linked in the description, by the way, so you can check it out there if you're interested. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.